Hi and welcome to the Rambling Rector. Today we're going to talk about the difference between a rector and a vicar. And while we're on the subject, we may as well think about ministers and pastors and padres and fathers and mothers and all sorts of other expressions and references to all of the various people you'll find in a church. Now, the first thing to say is that it's very much about which church you're going to. You've got lots and lots of Christian denominations, you've got lots of styles of worship within your church. You might be at a fairly modern kind of church with lots of live music and lots of hands in the air kind of waving, and you might refer to your leader there as, well, perhaps even a leader, or maybe a pastor, or maybe a minister. The important thing is that that's somebody who has set aside or been set aside in order to lead worship and to greater glorify God. So they're really leading worship, not necessarily in charge, but often are particularly gifted and particularly able to lead worship. Now, if you go to a more traditional, an older perhaps style church, you might see somebody up the front dressed in medieval clothes, and he or she will typically be a priest, and they will be referred to, generally speaking, as either a rector or a vicar. In more modern parlance, you might occasionally hear the expression priest in charge, which actually reflects their legal status. But the old idea of a rector is one of those ancient terms used by the church to denote somebody who is in charge. Now, not just churches have rectors. You might have heard the expression in a university where you have a rector as well. And essentially it just means somebody who's in charge of that organisation. And there are rectors all over the place in the church. And sometimes they can be people who are not necessarily ordained, but mostly they are. Now, if you as a rector were struggling to find a way of spending all of the money that was coming to you, because remember, you're collecting tithes, or about 10% of the income of your parish, you might find that you actually don't have enough time to do all of the work that you need to do, and so therefore you would employ somebody to do that work for you, and they would be vicariously undertaking the task of being a priest in that parish, and they would be known as a vicar. Now that means they're not necessarily the incumbent and they're not deriving the income, but they're doing the work on behalf of somebody else, the rector, and they're being paid accordingly. So if you find somebody who's a vicar, that means that traditionally they would be doing work for somebody else who's the rector. Now the rector might be an organisation, or it might be a lay person who's actually employing you. But those distinctions are often lost in history, and whereas some parishes now have vicars and some have rectors, actually it has very little to do with how they derive their income, because most of the money that the parish will make will go straight to the diocese or the body immediately above the parish, and the priest who is in charge of that parish will be paid by them. Now, as I say, in other churches you might find somebody who's known as a leader or a pastor. Now, a pastor has got lots to do with the image of the shepherd, and so he will be, or she will be, the shepherd of those sheep. And there will be a pastoral function and a leadership function as well. These tend to be churches that are more congregationally based and don't have necessarily a big hierarchy, and you'll find lots of pastors. Now, minister is another one of those terms which is actually quite common, and most people who have some kind of authoritative position in a parish or in a church or in a congregation are known collectively as ministers of religion. They administer and they minister to specific groups, and that's become more and more a legal term. So you might be a minister of religion and be one of all of the others. So there's a bit of distinction between them. You'll also find, particularly in the Anglican Church, people who are called archdeacons. In some Eastern churches you'll find archpriests, and in fact in the Catholic Church you'll also find people who are called Monsignor or Monsignori, and of course the Catholic Church have cardinals. Now, a lot of those traditional roles have gone by the way, and again that relates more to a rank and a hierarchy than any financial or responsibility within the church. And so therefore it's important to ask what somebody does rather than assume from their title about the nature of the job that they do. You'll also find people called father or padre or any number of other things. I used to be in the Navy and was called bish, which is a term of endearment, I am assured, but it doesn't relate to my episcopal authority. It's just one of those traditional names. And you'll find too in other forces and in other environments, priests of all kinds are called padre, which literally means father. It's a rather generic term now, and you'll find people who are in chaplaincy often called padre as well. So, if you meet somebody who is called the Reverend, how do you refer to them? Well, they'll often tell you, or you could ask how you would like to be referred to. For myself, I'm very happy with Reverend. I actually like people to use my first name as well. But that's a matter of preference. Some people will refer to you as Father, and in some churches as Mother, now that we have female priests in the Anglican Communion. I personally don't like the term father particularly, as it denotes a role that I don't have, and I'm certainly not your father. And it seems to indicate some sort of hierarchy and some kind of authority, which I don't particularly like. But I'm very happy if people call me that, if that's what they're used to. It's just not something that I prefer. So it's a matter then of finding out what works in the local community, but to also understand that for many priests and many vicars, the terms are interchangeable. So I hope that that has clarified the situation for you and that you found this video useful. Please like or subscribe, and there are more, and put a comment in if you would like, and I'll try and make a video next time that will include your answers. Thank you for watching.